It's all anyone can really talk about because the news is quite enormous. But we actually have an update worth talking about now. Of course, we're referencing the UFC betting scandal. Now, if you need to be caught up on what the latest is, I'll post the previous reaction that kind of combined all the elements of what happened this past Saturday, of course, which was UFC Fight Night, Garcia versus Onama. We're referring to the Isaac Dulgarian versus Yadier Del Valle fight. We'll explain all of that. That'll be up here. But we now have an update, which is, and frankly, a very important one. UFC President Dana White has weighed in. Now, it's an interesting choice about how he did this. He went to TMZ. He did not have a press conference. He did not have a press conference with other luminaries or important executives in the company. He just kind of did what it looked like a podcast interview, and TMZ put out a video about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. We're going to take a look at it here and react to it. Kind of an interesting choice. I mean, on the one hand, you have to understand what the UFC's positioning is here probably on some level, which is that they don't want to make it appear any worse than it already is. And there is some debate exactly about how bad it is. What is the true scope of the problem? So I think partly the choice to go to TMZ is, one, they're a sympathetic outlet. And then two, it kind of sort of sends the message that we're bringing down the temperature. But at the same time, the fact that he has to address it at all kind of indicates that they don't want this to spiral any further than it already has. You have the pre-fight betting lines. People were going crazy. Then you had the weird result in the fight. People were going crazier, right? Then eventually he gets cut. Isaac Dulgarian, they go even crazier. And then there's these reports that we've been talking about. Again, this is all my recaps that indicate that there could be many bouts that have been flagged for review, that the UFC knew ahead of time that there was some weird betting and let it go through anyway, right? We've kind of followed the story as such. In any case, we have not heard from UFC leadership. That has been the piece that is missing. So let's do that now. Let's listen to what Dana has to say, and then let's react to it.
Probably about 1 o'clock that day, we're with a company called IC360, and they are the best bet monitoring company in the business. And they reached out to us and they told us that there was some unusual action going on with that fight. Do we know anything? You know, we didn't. So what we did was we called the fighter and his lawyer.
I want to point out something here. When he says we called the fighter and his lawyer, I do not think that it could be somebody separate from his management that is his attorney. But when he says his lawyer, it sounds to me like what that might mean is somebody within his management company who has, I don't know, power of attorney or is an attorney and acts as an attorney for them. But I don't get the feeling that this is somebody distinct from his management that is also this outside attorney. To that point, Isaac Dulgarian has not been heard from at all since this whole thing broke. His coach has talked about it. Mark Montoya spoke to Ariel Helwani and said that he's no longer part of Factory X. So we've heard from him. The management team, which is, of course, here, Iridium, they have at least been talked to some degree through media proxies or even just other media asking them, I should say, is maybe a better way to put that. But to the point I'm trying to make is, if there is a person who is a lawyer who's not related to these proceedings and we've not heard from them, they do not appear to me to be a very great lawyer or known very much. So when he says lawyer here, I want to be clear. I can't prove it, and I'm not declaring it as absolutely true. My hunch is that it's just somebody at Iridium Sports, just somebody at his management firm. That's it.
And said, what's going on? There's some weird action going on in your bet. Weird betting action going on in your fight. Are you injured? Do you owe anybody money? Has anybody approached you to, and the kid said, no, absolutely not. I'm going to kill this guy. And, so we said, okay. The fight plays out and first round finish by rear naked choke. Literally the first thing we did was call the FBI.
IC360, which used to be called US Integrity, they changed their name. They do this kind of service for many sports leagues. When Dana says that they're the best in the business, my understanding is that is true. Like, they are absolutely the gold standard. And to that point, they did what they could. This is a private entity. It's not law enforcement as such. They flagged irregular betting and immediately told the UFC. So we should note here that some of the guardrails that were in place or supposed to be in place, some of them did their job. IC360 did their job. They caught irregular betting. They immediately told the UFC, and to the UFC's credit, up to this point, they then acted on it insofar as going to the fighter and being like, what is going on here? So I want to be clear. A, UFC knew about it, and B, to some extent, did act on it. And I should say it's B. And then C, ultimately, what I would say is U.S. integrity here as part of a broader system to either prevent or identify or help enforce the rules around betting. They did their job. They did their job. It should be noted. Now, here's the problem. The UFC let this fight go forward, and then you get the weird result. And then Dana White says the UFC then contacted the FBI about this. We'll talk about the FBI component here in just a second, but this is a matter of debate, and different people are going to have different answers based on who you talk to. But getting this kind of thing flagged, and I'm not someone who regularly bets. I don't know how much betting lines move, but we talked to Long Island Luke, our producer on Morning Combat. Like, I asked him, how much is this amount of movement before a fight in that kind of window? How irregular is that? And he was basically like insanely irregular. Like, it just doesn't move hardly at all like that. The extent to which it moved is highly, highly irregular. I've made this point before. That was the time to pull the bout. That was the moment to pull the bout. If they needed to kill time, they can kill time on the broadcast. If they need to explain whatever they need to say, it was pulled for undisclosed reasons, and then discuss it afterwards. They can do all of that. There are ways around this to get this done, but letting it go forward, here's the problem. Not everyone is going to agree with this, but some people are definitely going to make the argument that this brings the UFC into a degree of complicity in if this bout ends up being determined to be fixed in some way, or Dulgarian, it's proven, has thrown it. I want to be clear. We still don't know what the truth is about. When I say no, you can believe certain things, but when you have evidentiary proof for, we still don't know if Dulgarian threw it or not, or if the bout was fixed or not. He is innocent until there's some measure of evidence provided against him beyond the suspicious evidence that we have now. But more is, a paper trail, for example, would be needed. The UFC at least had great reason to believe that this betting was highly irregular, and they let it go forward. Now, again, they did some due diligence to go ask him. It's not like they did nothing and ignored the warnings. Fair enough. But the point I'm trying to make is, if it turns out that Dulgarian, again, if it turns out that Dulgarian is a paper trail that shows, he was definitely fight fixing or in on it in some kind of way, if that happens, then the UFC would have played part in facilitating that to a degree. Yes, they pay for the IC360 service. Yes, they acted on it. But if you let it go forward and it turns out that it's fixed, ultimately the buck kind of stops with you. This is my thing about, do they have to stop fights or prevent them from happening in every case where a bout betting is flagged? I don't know. But if the line moves like a full dollar in the way that it did here in the short window before the fight, it just seems to me like, and also just not extending your institutional credibility to the fight in the event that it blows up in your face. And it's not even the main event. It's just some fight on this was one of the most insignificant cards in terms of, where the ranked relevant action is in the UFC. This card had almost none of it. I even said this before. If you just look at the tiers of the kind of products that the UFC puts out, all the way from the premium pay-per-view end, forgetting like Road to UFC and then Contender Series, just within the actual UFC universe itself, this is the lowest tiered product that they can make. This is not a high stakes bout. You can just pull this thing and it's really a very marginal significance, and they let it go forward. There is an argument to be made about to what extent there's institutional complicity in potentially helping facilitate this when they had reason to believe differently, or I should say act differently based on what they knew.
So we called the FBI. I've met with the FBI twice today. So that's the whole thing. Now you see people out there talking, there's hundreds of fights under it. It's total bullshit. Total usual clickbait bullshit. IC360.
Very quickly, he's referring to the journalist Harry Mack. Harry Mack did not say there were hundreds of fights under investigation, but that hundreds of bouts had been flagged. That's very, very different.
Company, they monitor all of the betting. Like I said, they're the best in the business. There aren't hundreds of fights being investigated. All clickbait BS. So this company, IC360, which is the best bet monitoring company in the business, we've been with them for years. and we get a report after every single fight that we do. So for anybody out there that's clickbait saying, oh, there's hundreds of fights, it's all bullshit. We've been with these guys for years. We take this very serious, and we're watching every single fight that happens in the UFC, from the first prelim to the main event. So when this did happen, a couple of years ago, whenever it was, that investigation is still ongoing, and now will be a part of this investigation too.
What he's referencing there is the James Krause scandal. So that was in 2022. We're now in 2025, about to be in 2026. I feel like that's a little bit of a bombshell by Dana. We didn't know what the upside, or I should say the upshot rather, of the last investigation was. Derek Minner has kind of had a quiet return to combat sports. Jeff Molina, I believe, is eligible soon, or will be again eligible soon to compete again. James Krause, however, still quite excommunicated and not really involved in anything to the best of our knowledge. That investigation is apparently still ongoing. So the FBI looking into that hasn't ended, and now it's part of this one. Folks, two things I would point out. One, if you actually look at the NBA scandal, and when the FBI did their press conference to announce their charging of Terry Rozier and others, they had said that investigation was years long as well. That investigation had started during the Biden administration, not the last Trump administration, which has only been in office for 9 or 10 months, give or take. That it went much further back than that. So sometimes these investigations, a lot of times, like white collar crimes in particular, can take a little bit of time to put evidence together, I suppose. But in any case, that one also took some time to really get going. So how far reaching is this investigation? What do they know? Why has it taken so long? But the fact that it's not closed and the fact that it's ongoing, to me, is quite interesting. But the more interesting part to me is that it's connected to this one, which I understand why on some level that they might be. Hey, we had a betting scandal that remains unresolved, and now we've got this new betting issue. There could be some important common denominators between them, even if they're otherwise distinct entities. But they're not distinct entities. I mean, again, we don't know what the relationship is between them, other than here was a betting scandal in 2022, here's a betting scandal in 2025, both involving the UFC around similar kinds of perceived issues. Again, no one has been convicted of anything or even charged with anything yet, and from a legal matter. So we have to be very clear. These are allegations or insinuations that are made. But what would be the other common denominator? Well, again, I have no idea if it's relevant. It may very well not be relevant. But the fact that the representation is the same essentially all the way through, from the James Krause scandal to now this Isaac Dulgarian one, again, is that the relevant thing to lose it altogether? I don't know, but you can't not notice that on some level there. Like, again, if you're just trying to identify what are the things that are connecting the two potentially, such that Dana White is correct and he's saying that these are now going to be linked together. Is that a component of it? You just have to wonder aloud. And again, I don't tend to like to do baseless speculation if it can all be avoided. I'm just trying to think out loud based on what he is saying. What might be some of the others? What might be some of the common denominators? And there might be others as well. Again, it could simply just be, here's one, here's another. This one's ongoing. We can kind of put this together as a whole, even though these are, largely disconnected events. That could be a way to go about it. But it's also worth considering, are there deeper roots to this that tie it together? As of right now, the answer is we don't know about it, but it's certainly worth thinking about going forward.
You mentioned talking to the FBI. Are you directly talking to Kash Patel? I'm sure you do have a relationship.
Yeah, I talked to him this morning, but then we just had an office full of FBI agents in here. So,
I mean, this is the thing. Do I think that the FBI agents on the ground are going to do a good job? I have no reason to think that they wouldn't. Do I think that Kash Patel is going to go out of his way to make the UFC look bad if he needed to? Right? Imagine he just discovered that there was just incredible problems and this is the worst thing he's ever seen. Do I think he's going to act on that? No, I do not think he's going to act on that. I think he's going to do everything he possibly can to, make the FBI look good if that's possible, which, I mean, I don't really care about that. But clearly this guy, Dana White, is friends with the president. There's no possible way Kash Patel is going to get sideways with the UFC as a brand in order to pursue this investigation. I hope to be wrong. I could be wrong. I wouldn't count on it.
If you try to do this, I've been very vocal and very open about this. We will be your worst enemy. We will immediately go after you, guns a-blazing, with the FBI and whoever else we need to get. And we will do everything we can to make sure you go to prison. It's like, you're seeing things out on the internet where like fighters are coming out and going, "Oh, I was approached. Really? Why didn't you tell us that? Or more importantly, why didn't you tell law enforcement that you were approached? Now you're saying that you were approached? It's like,
there's probably very good reasons why they didn't say it. First of all, I just want to point out, remember, I mean, there's been people coming out of the woodwork saying that they've been offered to throw fights, that they didn't do it, but that they were offered at a bare minimum. Ariel's on air and can't stop getting texts about it from these people and that people and who he's talked to. It seems to be, I don't know exactly how widespread the problem is, but it doesn't appear to be uncommon. And to that point, just understand something on a basic level. If you've got a class of fighters, because again, it just appears to be a certain class of fighters that make less than what you might imagine a higher end UFC fighter to make. They make, they're good enough to make it to the UFC, but not good enough to make money in the UFC. And that's kind of one of that's who that these people who are asking them to throw fights, they appear to be preying on that. I know, by the way, people don't want to talk about fighter pay in that regard, because you're like, oh, you got people in the NBA throwing away millions, but they didn't throw games. They were just doing it against prop bets. And they might have had a genuine gambling addiction. As I've pointed out, if you're trying to blackmail someone, this is not blackmail, but if you're trying to do it, one of the pressure points would be someone who has financial liability or financial distress even. It makes them more vulnerable to make bad decisions. People are like, oh, you got to have bad integrity to do it. It has nothing to do with fighter pay. Well, yes, in the end, it becomes an integrity issue as well. Of course, there's no denying that. That's part of the conversation. But you have to be a child to not notice that a suite of things can ultimately affect it. And there's a common denominator here. They appear to be picking on a certain class of fighter. Now, if there's more information that comes out that challenges it, we can review that. But as it stands, it's all kind of a fighter of a certain level. You're good enough to make it, good enough to get some wins potentially, not good enough to make big dollars. That's who they appear to be going after. So the conversation around, oh, fighter pay is not relevant. I don't know, guys. It seems pretty fucking relevant to me. People want to pretend that the answer to any kind of moral question is just some sort of moral absolute answer. Oh, they're a good person. They're a bad person. They have no integrity. They have lots of integrity. But we live in the real world. And a lot of these things exist on a spectrum. And a lot of these things exist in ways where pressure points affect where they sit on the spectrum at any given time. People want to imagine I have absolute moral principles and would always act on them in every situation in that way. That's not true. Some people are better about it than others. Some people are really good about it. That's true. But most people have a certain kind of set of beliefs and they live on a certain kind of end of the spectrum on some of these moral questions. But you add in things like infidelity or bad choices that they might have made, or financial liability or distress, debts, these kinds of things. And it begins to affect their ability to adhere to their own worldview and their own principles. This is a known thing. This is how they work it out when they try to get security clearances, because they know pressure points end up making people make bad decisions. Not every time, not all the time, not every person, but enough that it's a thing you have to monitor. Now, to that point here, he's saying, why haven't the fighters come forward? Guys, if it's a routine, or I should say, if it's something approximating like a halfway normal thing for either you or someone in terms of that class of fighters to get approached for throwing fights, yeah, I got to tell you, you got bigger issues than broken lines of communication. I mean, on some level, what would there be to tell, right? If it's that common, it's kind of like just a thing that happens and everyone just sort of knows about it. What's there to tell? Now, of course, in the end, on the merits, Dana is right. They should say something. They might want to say something to law enforcement. But why else might not they say? Are they getting these? Again, we don't know who these people are who are making all of these offers for these guys to throw fights. Are these people dangerous? Do they have compromising information about people? Like, there can be any number of reasons. Also, they may not trust the UFC to look after their interests. Like, that could be a thing too. And so these are all factors that have some kind of role here that explain why there's a gap between what the fighters know and what they believe and what has happened to them versus what they tell Dana White and the UFC.
Like, if somebody comes up and says, hey, I want you to rob a bank. I'm going to rob banks. Want to rob a bank with me? and you don't do it. What you're not gonna tell law enforcement?
Maybe not.
It's really weird that fighters are coming out now saying they were, and they're going to be approached now by the FBI.
Well, that's good.
We see this going on in other sports, what the NBA is dealing with right now. As the person who runs the most prominent promotion in this sport, you just hate to see something like this, right? Whether the UFC or any other sport.
I hate to see anybody in our
That's it. I mean, just baiting him to be like, you think this is real bad, right? Okay.
sport do anything illegal, you know, but fight fixing is absolutely insane.
He's right.
To get to this level and be a part of fight. And I'm not saying this kid's guilty. You know what I mean? You know.
Exactly. We don't know if Dulgarian is guilty yet. There's certainly a lot of information and evidence that we have that demands investigation, but he's not been charged with anything. We don't know what the situation is. It's important to still say that. It's not just a rhetorical thing to say. It's an important reality to observe, and it changes the rules about what you can and can argue for.
There's no proof that he's done this yet, but I can tell you this: it doesn't look good. It definitely doesn't look good. You know, we approached him before the fight, he and his lawyer, and they denied that anything. You know, from everything. Are you hurt? You know, are you injured in any way? Do you owe people money? Have you been asked to do anything, you know, illegal? We asked them all the questions, and everything was absolutely not, hell no. So the fight went on. And then, like I said, fight ended by finish in the first round, literally walked out from the octagon into my room in the back and called the FBI.
The call on the FBI part is great. I'm glad they did it. I am glad the FBI is involved. You need the FBI involved. They absolutely have to be involved at this point. Well, there has to be some kind of law enforcement presence over this situation that people can trust will get to the bottom of it. Now, again, how far that will actually extend in a world where these compromising relationships between the director of the FBI and the president and Dana White and the director of the FBI. Again, I'm just not expecting the hammer to really fall on them, but the hammer could fall on some smaller players along the way, kind of closer to the bottom of the food chain in this whole thing. That absolutely could be something to pay attention to. In any event, this situation is far from over. We'll have more in the days and weeks to come. Stay tuned.